The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sergeant James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. His polished boots reflected the light streaming through the barracks windows, and every brass button on his red tunic gleamed with the dedication of hours spent preparing for this solemn duty. As a member of the Queen's Guard, Morrison had stood watch at Buckingham Palace, marched in countless parades, and maintained the stoic composure expected of his prestigious position. But today's assignment would test him in ways no amount of training could have prepared him for. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders as he reviewed the mission briefing. Private Tommy Richardson, age 19, had fallen in Afghanistan just 3 days earlier. The young soldier's body was being repatriated to England, and Morrison had been specifically chosen to escort him on the final journey home to his family in Manchester. It was an honor that came with immense emotional burden, ensuring that a hero's sacrifice would be treated with the dignity and respect it deserved every step of the way. Morrison had never met Private Richardson personally, but he had spent the previous evening reading through the young man's service record. Tommy had enlisted straight out of school, driven by a desire to serve his country and make a difference in the world. His commanding officers described him as fearless, compassionate, and always the first to volunteer for dangerous missions. He had saved 3 fellow soldiers during an ambush, paying the ultimate price for his bravery. The more Morrison learned about Tommy, the more determined he became to honor the fallen soldier's memory with unwavering dedication. The ceremony at the military base was small but profound. Tommy's flag-draped coffin was loaded onto the transport vehicle with military precision, while Morrison and several other soldiers stood at attention. The silence was broken only by the crisp commands of the supervising officer and the distant sound of aircraft preparing for departure. Morrison's throat tightened as he thought about Tommy's parents who were waiting at Manchester Airport with hearts full of grief and pride. They would be seeing their son for the last time, and Morrison was determined to ensure that moment would be marked by the honor Tommy deserved. As the convoy moved toward the airport, Morrison sat beside Tommy's coffin, maintaining the vigilant watch that military protocol demanded. The journey through the English countryside felt both eternal and fleeting. Rolling hills and quaint villages passed by the windows, a stark contrast to the battlefield where Tommy had made his final stand. Morrison found himself speaking quietly to the fallen soldier, sharing observations about the landscape and promising that he would see Tommy safely home to his family. The airport presented its own set of challenges and protocols. Military flights operated under different procedures than commercial aviation, but the coordination required was still immense. Morrison had been briefed on every aspect of the transfer process, from the moment they arrived at the military section of the airport until Tommy's coffin would be loaded onto the civilian aircraft that would carry him to Manchester. Every detail had been planned with meticulous care to ensure dignity and respect throughout the entire journey. Upon arrival at the airport, Morrison immediately noticed the controlled chaos typical of busy aviation hubs. Ground crews hurried between aircraft, passengers queued at check-in counters, and announcements echoed through the terminal buildings. However, in the military section where they had arrived, an atmosphere of reverence prevailed. Airport security personnel had been notified of their arrival, and special arrangements had been made to facilitate the smooth transfer of Tommy's remains. Morrison, carefully supervised as Tommy's coffin was transferred from the military transport vehicle to a specialized airport cart. Every movement was executed with ceremonial precision, reflecting the honor due to a fallen hero. The Union Jack covering the coffin fluttered slightly in the airport breeze, a poignant reminder of the sacrifice it represented. Morrison maintained his position beside the coffin, his role as guardian and protector continuing even in this civilian environment. The administrative procedures required for transporting a fallen soldier were extensive and complex. Morrison had to coordinate with multiple airport departments, ensuring that all documentation was properly completed and that security protocols were followed without compromising the dignity of the ceremony. Each stamp and signature in the paperwork represented another step closer to reuniting Tommy with his family, and Morrison treated every bureaucratic requirement with the seriousness it deserved. As they moved through the airport's military processing area, Morrison was struck by the professionalism and respect shown by the civilian airport staff. Many had experience handling such solemn occasions, and they approached their duties with an understanding of the gravity of the situation. The contrast between the busy commercial areas of the airport and the quiet dignity of the military section was profound, creating a space where proper honor could be maintained. The connection flight to Manchester was scheduled to depart in 3 hours, providing a window for final preparations and ensuring that Tommy's family would be properly notified of their arrival time. Morrison used this interval to review the protocols for the final leg of the journey, mentally rehearsing every step that would lead to the moment when Tommy would be returned to his loved ones. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but it was a burden he carried with pride and determination. As the departure time approached, Morrison could feel the emotional magnitude of the mission intensifying. Soon they would be airborne, carrying Tommy toward his final homecoming. The sergeant's training had prepared him for many challenges. But the human dimension of this duty, the grieving family waiting for their son, the weight of a nation's gratitude for Tommy's sacrifice, and the profound honor of serving as guardian for a fallen hero, created an emotional complexity that no manual could address. Morrison straightened his shoulders, checked his uniform one final time, and prepared to continue the sacred journey that would soon bring Tommy Richardson home to the family and country he had died defending. The boarding process began with the same military precision that had characterized the entire operation thus far. Morrison watched as ground crew members carefully positioned the specialized lift that would raise Tommy's coffin into the aircraft's cargo hold. Every movement was deliberate and respectful, reflecting the training these professionals had received for handling such precious cargo. The Union Jack remained perfectly positioned over the coffin, its colors vibrant against the gray metal of the airport equipment. As passengers began boarding the commercial flight to Manchester, Morrison noticed the curious glances directed toward the military activity taking place on the tarmac. Most travelers continued with their routines, unaware of the solemn cargo being loaded below their feet. A few paused to watch, perhaps recognizing the significance of the ceremony they were witnessing. Morrison felt a surge of pride knowing that Tommy's sacrifice was being honored before these ordinary citizens who continued their daily lives in the freedom he had died to protect. The aircraft captain approached Morrison during the loading process, introducing himself with the grave courtesy appropriate to the occasion. Captain Williams had transported fallen soldiers before and understood the weight of the responsibility they all shared. He assured Morrison that Tommy would be treated with the highest honor throughout the flight, and that the crew had been specially briefed on the protocols for this sensitive mission. The professionalism and compassion in the captain's voice provided Morrison with confidence that Tommy's journey would continue with the dignity it deserved. Morrison's seat was located near the rear of the aircraft, positioning him as close as possible to the cargo hold where Tommy rested. Military regulations required that an escort remain vigilant throughout the entire journey, maintaining a symbolic watch over the fallen soldier even during flight. As passengers settled into their seats around him, Morrison reflected on the strange juxtaposition of his ceremonial uniform among travelers in casual clothing, business suits, and vacation attire. None of them could possibly understand the sacred duty that brought him aboard this flight. During takeoff, Morrison found his thoughts drifting to Tommy's family waiting in Manchester. The young soldier's parents had been notified of the approximate arrival time, and Morrison knew they would be gathering at the airport with other relatives and friends. The reunion they had dreamed of during Tommy's deployment would be forever different from what they had imagined, transformed from joyous celebration into solemn ceremony. Morrison's role was to ensure that this final meeting would be conducted with all the honor and dignity that Tommy's service and sacrifice demanded. The flight attendants treated Morrison with exceptional courtesy throughout the journey, understanding the nature of his mission without requiring detailed explanations. One senior crew member quietly informed him that they were honored to be carrying a hero home, and asked if there was anything special they could do to assist with the mission. Morrison was touched by their genuine concern and respect, recognizing that the civilian aviation crew understood the gravity of their shared responsibility. As the aircraft cruised toward Manchester, Morrison reviewed the protocols for the arrival ceremony one final time. Tommy's family would be waiting in a private area of the airport, shielded from the busy terminal environment, while maintaining a clear view of the tarmac where the coffin would be ceremonially removed from the aircraft. Morrison would oversee the transfer process, ensuring that every detail met the exacting standards expected for a fallen hero's homecoming. The descent toward Manchester Airport began smoothly, with the captain making a brief announcement to passengers about their imminent arrival. Morrison felt his heart rate increase as the reality of the approaching ceremony intensified. Soon, he would be standing before Tommy's parents, representing not only the military but the entire nation's gratitude for their son's sacrifice. The weight of that representation was both humbling and empowering, driving Morrison to maintain the highest possible standards in every aspect of his conduct. Manchester's skyline came into view through the aircraft windows. The familiar landmarks of Tommy's hometown spread beneath them like a welcoming embrace. Morrison imagined the young soldier's excitement during previous homecomings, the anticipation of seeing family and friends after months of deployment. The current circumstances transformed that familiar landscape into something more profound. A final destination rather than a temporary reunion, a permanent return to the soil Tommy had sworn to defend. The aircraft touched down with barely perceptible contact, testament to the captain's skill and recognition of the precious cargo aboard. As they taxied toward the gate, Morrison could see the military personnel and airport officials who had gathered to receive Tommy with appropriate ceremony. The sight of the honor guard waiting on the tarmac filled Morrison with pride and relief, knowing that every protocol was being followed to ensure Tommy's dignity would be maintained until the final moment of transfer to his family. Passengers began disembarking through the main cabin door, their vacation and business trips continuing normally, while a much more significant journey was reaching its conclusion in the cargo hold below. Morrison remained seated until the cabin emptied, then made his way to the exit where airport officials were waiting to escort him to the tarmac for the ceremony. The contrast between the ordinary bustle of deplaning passengers and the solemn gravity of his own mission created a surreal atmosphere that Morrison would remember for the rest of his life. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, Morrison could hear the distinctive sounds of military ceremony beginning on the tarmac below. Crisp commands, precise footsteps, and the subtle mechanical noises of equipment being positioned for the honor ceremony. Tommy Richardson was home, and Morrison's sacred duty was entering its final, most crucial phase. The young soldier's family was waiting just beyond the terminal walls, their hearts heavy with grief but swelling with pride for their son's service and sacrifice. The moment Morrison had been preparing for throughout the entire journey was finally at hand. Soon he would stand before Tommy's parents and formally present their son, completing a mission that had tested every aspect of his training, dedication, and humanity. The Union Jack that had covered Tommy throughout the journey would be folded with ceremonial precision and presented to his family as a symbol of the nation's eternal gratitude. Morrison straightened his shoulders, checked his uniform one final time, and prepared to honor both the fallen soldier he had escorted home and the grieving family who had entrusted him with their most precious burden. Morrison descended to the tarmac where the honor ceremony was already taking shape with military precision. The Manchester Airport ground crew had cordoned off a section of the area, creating a respectful space for the solemn proceedings about to unfold. 6 members of Tommy's own regiment stood at attention, having traveled from their base to participate in welcoming their fallen comrade home. Their uniforms were immaculate, their bearing reflecting the gravity of the occasion and their personal connection to the young soldier they had come to honor. This so specialized equipment required for removing Tommy's coffin from the aircraft cargo hold was positioned with ceremonial care. Morrison supervised as the hydraulic lift was aligned perfectly with the aircraft's cargo door, ensuring that every movement would be executed with the dignity befitting a hero's homecoming. The airport's head of operations personally oversaw the civilian aspects of the ceremony, demonstrating the institution's commitment to honoring those who had made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. As the cargo hold doors opened, Morrison felt the weight of the moment settle over the assembled group. The Union Jack covering Tommy's coffin was immediately visible, its colors bright against the industrial gray of the aircraft's interior. Morrison positioned himself at the head of the coffin, assuming the place of honor he had maintained throughout the entire journey from Afghanistan. The 6 soldiers from Tommy's regiment moved into formation, creating a guard of honor that would escort their comrade on this final march. The removal process began with the slow, dignified movements that military protocol demanded. Morrison and the honor guard carefully guided Tommy's coffin onto the hydraulic platform, each step measured and deliberate. The airport workers operating the machinery had been specially trained for such occasions, understanding that their technical expertise was serving a higher purpose than routine cargo handling. Every mechanical sound seemed amplified in the respectful silence that had settled over the tarmac. As Tommy's coffin was lowered to ground level, Morrison caught sight of the family reception area through the terminal windows. Tommy's parents stood with several other relatives, their faces pressed against the glass as they watched their son's homecoming ceremony. Mrs. Richardson clutched her husband's arm, both of them displaying the mixture of pride and devastating grief that marked the families of fallen heroes. Morrison's throat tightened as he realized that these parents were seeing their son for the first time since his deployment and the last time ever. The honor guard assumed their positions around Tommy's coffin with movements that spoke of countless hours of practice and deep respect for the fallen. Morrison took his place at the head of the formation, his role as escort continuing even as local military personnel assumed responsibility for the ceremony. The coordination between Morrison and Tommy's regiment was seamless, reflecting the shared commitment to military excellence that transcended individual units and commands. The procession across the tarmac began with the measured pace of a funeral march, each step synchronized and purposeful. Morrison led the formation toward the terminal building where Tommy's family waited, acutely aware that every moment of this ceremony would be burned into the memories of those who loved the young soldier. The click of military boots on the airport concrete created a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of a grateful nation paying its respects to a fallen defender. Airport. Security had established a clear pathway from the aircraft to the family reception area, ensuring that the ceremony could proceed without interruption. Curious passengers watching from terminal windows fell silent as they recognized the solemnity of the scene unfolding below them. Some pressed their hands to their hearts, others stood at attention despite their civilian clothes, instinctively responding to the profound dignity of the military honors being rendered. As the procession neared the terminal building, Morrison could see Tommy's family more clearly through the windows. His mother was weeping openly while maintaining her composure, supported by her husband who stood with military bearing despite his obvious emotion. Tommy's younger sister stood beside them, barely 18 herself, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of her brother's sacrifice. Extended family members and family friends had gathered to provide support, creating a circle of love around the immediate family. The final approach to the terminal required coordination with airport officials to ensure that the ceremony could continue smoothly into the family reception area. Morrison had rehearsed these moments mentally throughout the journey, but the emotional reality of approaching Tommy's grieving parents tested his professional composure. The young man he had escorted home had been someone's beloved son, brother, and friend, not just a fallen soldier, but a human being whose loss would reverberate through countless lives. Morrison's communication with airport security had been thorough and detailed, ensuring that every aspect of the transfer from tarmac to family would be handled with appropriate dignity. The protocols had been established through years of experience with similar ceremonies, but each homecoming carried its own emotional weight and unique circumstances. Morrison was confident that the coordination would be flawless, allowing the family's reunion with Tommy to proceed without any complications that might compromise the honor of the occasion. As they reached the terminal entrance designated for the ceremony, Morrison could feel the anticipation building among Tommy's family members. The formal military honors would soon give way to the private, personal moment when parents would be reunited with their son. Morrison's role would shift from escort to presenter, formally returning Tommy to the family that had entrusted him to military service and, ultimately, to the nation's defense. The transition from the public ceremony on the tarmac to the private family moment represented a crucial phase of Morrison's mission. Military protocol required that the formal honors be maintained until Tommy was officially transferred to his family's care, but human compassion demanded recognition of the profound personal loss that the parents were experiencing. Morrison had been trained to balance these requirements with sensitivity and grace, ensuring that duty and empathy worked together rather than in conflict. The terminal doors opened to admit the honor guard, beginning the final phase of Tommy Richardson's journey home. Morrison maintained his position at the head of the coffin, preparing for the moment when he would look into the eyes of Tommy's parents and formally return their son to them. Everything he had trained for, every aspect of his military service and all his personal strength would be tested in the moments ahead as he completed this sacred duty. The family reception area had been carefully arranged to provide both privacy and dignity for Tommy's homecoming ceremony. Morrison led the honor guard through the terminal corridor, noting the respectful silence that had settled over airport staff and the few passengers who happened to witness their passage. The sound of their synchronized footsteps echoed off the polished floors, creating a solemn rhythm that seemed to resonate with the gravity of their mission. As they approached the family area, Morrison could see Tommy's parents through the glass partition that separated the reception space from the main terminal. Mr. Richardson stood with the bearing of a man who understood military service, his posture reflecting both pride in his son's sacrifice and the devastating weight of loss. Mrs. Richardson held a folded piece of paper that Morrison recognized as Tommy's final letter home, written before the mission that had claimed his life. Their faces showed the mixture of anticipation and dread that marked this bittersweet moment of reunion. The honor guard positioned Tommy's coffin in the center of the reception area with movements that had been rehearsed to perfection. Morrison maintained his place at the head of the formation, preparing for the formal presentation that would transfer responsibility for Tommy from military care to family custody. The Union Jack covering the coffin was perfectly arranged, its colors serving as a symbol of the nation for which Tommy had made the ultimate sacrifice. Morrison stepped forward to address Tommy's family, his voice carrying the formal tone required by military protocol, while conveying the genuine emotion appropriate to the moment. He introduced himself as the escort who had accompanied Tommy throughout the journey home, explaining his role in ensuring that proper military honors were maintained at every step. The parents listened with rapt attention, grateful for the dedication Morrison had shown in bringing their son home with dignity and respect. The formal presentation of Tommy to his family required specific words that Morrison had memorized but which carried profound meaning in this context. He spoke of Tommy's courage in action, his dedication to his fellow soldiers, and the honor he had brought to his unit and his country. Every phrase was chosen to acknowledge both the magnitude of Tommy's sacrifice and the depth of his family's loss, creating a bridge between military formality and human grief. As Morrison continued the presentation, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision that seemed inconsistent with the solemn ceremony. Several airport staff members had approached the reception area, their body language suggesting they had concerns about the proceedings. Morrison maintained his focus on the family presentation, while mentally noting the developing situation, his training alerting him to potential disruptions of the ceremony. The airport staff members appeared to be discussing something among themselves, occasionally gesturing toward the honor guard and the ceremonial arrangements. Morrison could see that Tommy's family had also noticed the disturbance, their attention beginning to drift from his presentation to the growing commotion nearby. The sanctity of the moment was being threatened by what appeared to be an administrative concern that had not been properly coordinated in advance. Morrison concluded the formal presentation and prepared for the flag-folding ceremony that would present the Union Jack to Tommy's parents as a symbol of national gratitude. This was one of the most emotionally significant moments of the entire ceremony, requiring absolute concentration and flawless execution. The presence of agitated airport staff threatened to compromise the dignity of this sacred ritual, creating a situation that Morrison would need to address without disrupting the family's experience. As the honor guard began the precise movements of the flag-folding ceremony, one of the airport staff members approached Morrison directly. The individual appeared to be a supervisor, carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone dealing with a regulatory concern. Morrison continued to participate in the flag ceremony while preparing to address whatever issue had prompted this interruption of the proceedings. The flag folding proceeded with military precision, each fold executed with the reverence that the ceremony demanded. Tommy's mother watched with tears streaming down her face as the Union Jack was transformed from a coffin, covering into the triangular presentation format that she would treasure for the rest of her life. The approaching airport official seemed to recognize the importance of the moment and held back slightly, but his presence continued to create an undercurrent of tension. Morrison completed his participation in the flag ceremony and stepped aside to address the airport supervisor. The conversation began in hushed tones, with Morrison attempting to understand the nature of the concern while maintaining awareness of the ongoing ceremony. The official appeared to be questioning some aspect of the arrangements, possibly related to security protocols or documentation requirements that had not been satisfied to his standards. The airport supervisor's concerns seemed to focus on the extended presence of the military ceremony in the family reception area. Despite the advanced coordination that had taken place, he appeared to have questions about the authorization for certain aspects of the proceedings. Morrison realized that bureaucratic confusion was threatening to intrude upon one of the most sacred moments in the Richardson family's lives, requiring immediate and diplomatic resolution. Tommy's father approached Morrison during the discussion with the airport supervisor, his expression showing concern about the apparent complication. Mr. Richardson had served in the military himself and understood the importance of following proper procedures, but he was also protective of his family's right to receive their son with appropriate dignity. The convergence of military protocol, civilian regulations, and family emotions created a complex situation that demanded careful handling. Morrison found himself in the position of needing to advocate for the continuation of the ceremony while addressing legitimate administrative concerns. His training had prepared him for many challenges, but navigating the intersection of military honors and civilian bureaucracy while protecting a grieving family's experience required skills that went beyond standard protocols. The success of Tommy's homecoming now depended on Morrison's ability to resolve the situation diplomatically. The airport supervisor continued to reference various regulations and procedures that he claimed were not being properly followed. Morrison listened carefully while evaluating which concerns were legitimate and which might be addressed through explanation or documentation. The honor guard maintained their positions around Tommy's coffin, awaiting instructions while the family watched with growing anxiety about the potential disruption of their son's homecoming ceremony. Morrison's mind raced through the extensive coordination that had taken place prior to Tommy's arrival, searching for any detail that might have been overlooked or miscommunicated. The ceremony had proceeded flawlessly until this point, suggesting that the current concerns might be based on a misunderstanding rather than actual violations of protocol. However, the airport supervisor appeared to have the authority to halt the proceedings if his concerns were not adequately addressed, creating a situation that required immediate resolution. Morrison stepped closer to the airport supervisor, speaking in measured tones that conveyed both respect for civilian authority and unwavering commitment to completing Tommy's homecoming ceremony. He carefully explained that every aspect of the proceedings had been coordinated in advance through proper channels, providing specific names and reference numbers for the authorizations that had been obtained. The supervisor listened but continued to express concerns about certain security protocols that he claimed were not being followed according to current regulations. The tension in the family reception area was becoming palpable as Tommy's relatives watched the discussion between Morrison and the airport official. Mrs. Richardson clutched the folded flag that had covered her son's coffin, her knuckles white with the intensity of her grip. The sacred moment of receiving their son was being overshadowed by bureaucratic complications that none of them could fully understand. Morrison could see the distress in their faces and felt his protective instincts surge, determined to shield them from any further disruption. The airport supervisor demanded to see additional documentation that he claimed was required for military ceremonies conducted in civilian facilities. Morrison produced the comprehensive packet of authorizations that had been prepared for this mission, spreading the documents across a nearby table for review. Each page represented hours of coordination between military and civilian authorities, yet the supervisor seemed to find new concerns with every document he examined. Other airport staff members began to gather around the developing confrontation, some appearing curious about the nature of the dispute, while others seemed genuinely concerned about the military presence in their facility. Morrison realized that the situation was escalating beyond a simple administrative misunderstanding and was becoming a potential threat to the dignity of Tommy's ceremony. He made a mental decision to take more assertive action to protect the Richardson family's experience. Drawing upon his training in diplomatic communication, Morrison addressed the airport supervisor with firm courtesy. He explained that Private Richardson had died serving his country, and that his family deserved to receive him with honor and dignity. Any administrative concerns could be addressed after the ceremony was completed, but the sacred nature of the homecoming took precedence over regulatory technicalities. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command while maintaining the respect appropriate to civilian leadership. The supervisor appeared unmoved by Morrison's appeal and continued to insist that the ceremony could not proceed until certain additional procedures were completed. He cited specific airport regulations that he claimed superseded any military authorizations, creating a standoff that threatened to halt the proceedings indefinitely. Morrison could see Tommy's father moving closer to the discussion, his face showing the anger that any parent would feel when their child's honor was being questioned. Morrison made a strategic decision to contact his military superiors, using his mobile phone to reach the commanding officer who had authorized the mission. The conversation was brief but productive, with Morrison's superior immediately grasping the nature of the situation and promising to contact airport management directly. Military influence at higher levels would be brought to bear on the administrative obstacles that were disrupting Tommy's homecoming. While waiting for the command intervention to take effect, Morrison noticed that other airport employees were beginning to question the supervisor's actions. Several staff members who had been present during the initial coordination meetings approached to express their confusion about the current complications. They confirmed that all necessary arrangements had been made in advance and that the ceremony should be proceeding without interference. Airport supervisor's position became increasingly isolated as more of his colleagues expressed support for the military ceremony. Morrison sensed that the tide was turning in favor of completing Tommy's homecoming with proper dignity, but he remained cautious about declaring victory too early. The Richardson family was still caught in the middle of an administrative dispute that should never have affected their private moment of grief and remembrance. A senior airport manager arrived at the family reception area, having been summoned by Morrison's commanding officer through direct communication with airport executive leadership. The manager's expression showed both embarrassment about the situation and determination to resolve it immediately. He took the questioning supervisor aside for a private conversation that Morrison hoped would clarify the proper procedures and allow the ceremony to continue. Morrison used the brief respite to check on Tommy's family, offering reassurance that the administrative complications would be resolved quickly. Mr. Richardson expressed his appreciation for Morrison's advocacy on behalf of his son and family, noting that the sergeant's dedication went beyond the call of duty. The support meant more to Morrison than any official commendation could have, confirming that his efforts to protect Tommy's homecoming were worthwhile. The private conversation between the airport manager and the questioning supervisor concluded with clear resolution in favor of the military ceremony. The manager approached Morrison to offer formal apologies for the disruption and to confirm that the proceedings could continue without further interference. All necessary authorizations were confirmed to be in proper order, and additional security measures would be implemented to prevent any future complications. Morrison felt a wave of relief wash over him as he realized that Tommy's homecoming would be completed with the dignity it deserved. The honor guard had maintained their positions throughout the bureaucratic challenge, demonstrating the same dedication that had characterized the entire mission. Tommy's family could now focus on their reunion with their son without the distraction of administrative disputes that had no bearing on the profound significance of the moment. The airport supervisor, who had initiated the complications, was quietly reassigned to other duties, his concerns having been determined to be based on misunderstanding rather than legitimate regulatory requirements. Morrison made a mental note to ensure that future ceremonies would include even more detailed coordination to prevent similar misunderstandings. The protection of grieving families from bureaucratic interference would become part of his recommendations for improving escort protocols. With the administrative obstacles resolved, Morrison prepared to complete the final phase of Tommy's homecoming ceremony. The presentation of the folded flag to Mrs. Richardson could now proceed with the solemnity it deserved, unmarred by concerns about regulatory compliance. The sacred trust between the military and the families of fallen soldiers had been preserved through Morrison's determined advocacy and the ultimate triumph of human dignity over bureaucratic procedure. The experience had tested Morrison in ways that traditional military training could never have anticipated, requiring him to balance respect for civilian authority with unwavering commitment to his fallen comrade and the grieving family. The successful resolution confirmed his belief that dedication and diplomacy could overcome even the most challenging obstacles when guided by clear moral purpose and genuine respect for human dignity. With the administrative complications finally resolved, Morrison returned his full attention to the sacred ceremony that had brought him to Manchester. The family reception area was restored to its proper atmosphere of dignity and reverence, allowing Tommy's homecoming to proceed as it had been intended from the beginning. The Richardson family gathered closer to their son's coffin, prepared to complete the final moments of reunion that would mark the end of Tommy's journey and the beginning of their lifelong process of remembrance. Morrison positioned himself beside Mrs. Richardson, holding the carefully folded Union Jack that would serve as the nation's final tribute to her son's sacrifice. The triangular presentation of the flag represented not only Tommy's individual service, but the broader commitment of all military families who entrust their loved ones to the defense of freedom. Morrison's words would bridge the gap between military formality and maternal grief, acknowledging both the national significance of Tommy's loss and the personal devastation experienced by his family. The presentation of the flag proceeded with the solemn dignity that military tradition demanded. Morrison spoke the time-honored words that accompanied such presentations, explaining that the flag was offered on behalf of a grateful nation in recognition of Tommy's honorable and faithful service. Mrs. Richardson received the flag with trembling hands, holding it against her heart as tears streamed down her face. The weight of the folded fabric seemed to embody all the hopes and dreams that had died with her son in that distant battlefield. Mr. Richardson stood beside his wife, with the bearing of a man who understood military sacrifice from personal experience. His own service years earlier had given him insight into the brotherhood that Morrison represented and the sacred trust that bound all soldiers together. He shook Morrison's hand with a grip that conveyed both gratitude for the sergeant's dedication and shared understanding of the burden that military service placed on those who wore the uniform and their families. Tommy's sister approached Morrison with questions about her brother's final days, seeking details that might help her understand the circumstances of his death and the nature of his heroic actions. Morrison provided what information he could while respecting the boundaries of military confidentiality, focusing on Tommy's courage, his concern for fellow soldiers, and the respect he had earned among his comrades. These personal insights meant more to the grieving sister than any official commendation could have provided. The extended family members who had gathered to support the Richardsons expressed their appreciation for the honor that had been shown to Tommy throughout his journey home. Morrison realized that his role had extended far beyond the technical requirements of military escort duty to become a symbol of the nation's commitment to honoring its fallen defenders. Every aspect of his conduct had been observed and remembered by people who would carry these memories for the rest of their lives. As the formal ceremony concluded, Morrison made arrangements for the transfer of Tommy's remains to the funeral home that would prepare him for burial. The coordination required careful attention to maintaining dignity throughout the transition from military to civilian care, ensuring that the respect shown during the homecoming ceremony would continue through the funeral preparations. Morrison's escort duties would officially end with this transfer, but his emotional investment in Tommy's honor would continue indefinitely. Private moments that followed the formal ceremony allowed Morrison to witness the Richardson family's initial steps toward processing their grief. He observed their interactions with quiet respect, noting how they drew strength from each other and from the knowledge that Tommy's sacrifice had been recognized and honored. The successful completion of the homecoming ceremony provided a foundation of dignity upon which they could build their remembrance of their beloved son and brother. Morrison began preparing for his return journey to his own base, gathering the documents and personal items that had accompanied him throughout the mission. The administrative challenges that had threatened to disrupt the ceremony had been overcome through persistence and proper advocacy. confirming his belief that dedication to duty required standing firm against obstacles that threatened the honor of fallen comrades. The experience would inform his approach to future escort missions and his recommendations for protecting military families. Before departing, Morrison spent additional time with Tommy's family, sharing observations about the young soldier's character that had become evident during the escort mission. He described the respect shown by everyone who had participated in Tommy's journey home, from the military personnel at the departure base to the civilian airport workers who had facilitated the ceremony. These details helped the family understand that their son's sacrifice had touched many lives and would be remembered far beyond their immediate circle. The final moments of Morrison's time with the Richardson family were marked by expressions of mutual respect and gratitude. They thanked him not only for his professional dedication, but for the personal care he had shown in protecting Tommy's honor throughout the journey. Morrison, in turn, thanked them for entrusting him with their most precious responsibility and for the privilege of serving a family that had given so much to their country. As Morrison prepared to leave Manchester Airport, he reflected on the profound nature of the mission he had just completed. Escorting Tommy Richardson home had tested every aspect of his military training and personal character, requiring him to navigate complex emotional terrain while maintaining unwavering commitment to duty and honor. The successful completion of the mission, despite unexpected challenges, confirmed his belief in the importance of military traditions and the sacred trust between soldiers and the families who support them. The journey back to his own base would provide time for Morrison to process the emotional impact of the escort mission and to prepare the detailed report that would document every aspect of Tommy's homecoming. His recommendations would focus on preventing future administrative complications while preserving the dignity that military families deserved during their most difficult moments. The memory of Mrs. Richardson's face as she received the folded flag would remain with him forever, serving as a constant reminder of the human cost of military service. Morrison's mission was complete, but the impact of his service extended far beyond the technical requirements of military escort duty. Tommy Richardson had been returned to his family with the honor he deserved, and his memory would be preserved with the dignity that reflected both his individual sacrifice and the broader commitment of all who serve in defense of freedom. The sergeant had fulfilled his sacred duty, ensuring that a fallen hero's final journey home would be remembered with pride and reverence for generations to come.